The candlelight flickered, casting restless shadows across the walls of the dimly lit motel room. Reyan's hands trembled as he gripped the tattered notebook, its once white pages now stained with time and sorrow. The ink smudged beneath his fingertips, but he kept writing. One last prayer, a desperate plea carved in ink and despair. If anyone is listening, if anything remains of what I once believed, let this suffering end. I am tired. I'm done. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes as if the night itself wept for him. He exhaled shakily, closing his eyes. The weight of his losses pressed down on him like an ocean tide, relentless and unforgiving. His wife gone. His child lost. His faith shattered. Reyan reached for the small glass bottle on the nightstand. A handful of pills, a swallow of whiskey, and it would all fade. No more pain. No more past. Then it happened. A whisper. Soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, but unmistakable. It carried his name, stretching through the silence like a thread pulling at the frayed edges of his soul. Reyan. His breath hitched. The voice was not human. Neither warm nor cold, neither male nor female. It was something else, something ancient, something that vibrated in his very bones. His eyes darted across the room. Me. His pulse hammered. His mind, already weary from grief, must have conjured it. A trick of exhaustion, a cruel echo of his own conscience. He turned back to the notebook, ready to finish what he started. But then, the whisper came again, firmer this time. Closer. Your journey is not over. The air grew heavier, thick with an unseen force. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. This was not grief. This was not madness. It was something else. Shaking, Reyan rose from the bed, his body moving as if compelled by an unseen hand. He turned toward the window, expecting darkness. Instead he saw it. A faint glow pulsed in the distance, just beyond the city skyline. A symbol, etched in gold and fire, hovered against the blackened sky. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, ancient yet familiar, like a memory buried deep within his soul. His breath quickened. It was calling him. Reyan stumbled backward, his heart slamming against his ribs. The pills lay forgotten on the nightstand. The notebook, unfinished, fluttered to the floor. Something was shifting. Something was beginning. And for the first time in years, Reyan hesitated. The golden symbol pulsed against the horizon, neither near nor distant, but somehow always within reach. Reyan walked through the empty streets, the world around him eerily silent. The wind had died, the hum of the city muted, as if the entire universe was holding its breath. He didn't know why he was following the symbol, only that he had to. His steps led him beyond the city limits, where the skeletal remains of forgotten roads stretched toward the mountains. Hours passed, but he didn't feel fatigue. Time had lost its meaning. Then, at the end of the path, it appeared. An ancient monastery, crumbling yet untouched by time, stood beneath the pale moonlight. Ivy curled around its stone pillars, its grand wooden doors slightly ajar, as if expecting him. Should not exist. Reyan hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But the whisper returned, brushing against his mind like silk. Enter. His fingers trembled as he pushed open the heavy doors. A rush of cool air greeted him, carrying the scent of old paper and something faintly metallic, like blood. Inside, the world was frozen. Candles burned, but their flames did not flicker. Dust hung suspended in the air, unmoving. A massive clock on the far wall stood still, its hands hovering at midnight. And at the center of the room, a table waited. Upon it lay an envelope, addressed to him. Reyan's breath hitched. His name was scrawled across the parchment in his own handwriting, but he had no memory of writing it. Hands shaking, he unfolded the letter. The ink was dark, fresh, as if the words had been written just moments before. Reyan, you have arrived, just as you were always meant to. Time is not what you believe it to be. Your soul remembers what your mind has forgotten. Before you were born, you made a choice. Back. But to reclaim what was lost, you must face what you fear most. There is no escape, no turning back. Walk forward, and you will remember. Break the mirror, and the path will open. Do not be afraid. His pulse thundered in his ears. This was insanity. His past self writing letters to his present. Packed before birth. It was impossible. And yet, A mirror stood at the far end of the hall. Tall, ancient, its surface rippling like disturbed water. Reyan stepped toward it, drawn by an unseen force. His reflection stared back, tired, broken but watching him. Then it whispered, "You're not ready." Reyan staggered back, the voice his own. The mirror trembled. Cracks spread across its surface like veins of lightning. Something moved inside. Hand. Shadow. Memory. And then the glass shattered. Darkness swallowed him whole. Darkness enveloped Reyan, not the kind of darkness found in the dead of night, but something deeper, a void, endless and consuming. He felt himself falling, yet there was no wind, no gravity, only an infinite abyss pulling him into its depths. His heartbeat echoed, loud and distorted, as if the very fabric of reality had unraveled around him. Then impact. He hit the ground hard, but there was no pain, just a cold stillness seeping into his skin. Slowly he opened his eyes, and froze. He was no longer in the monastery. He stood in the middle of a twisted reflection of the world he knew, a place where everything was almost right, but not quite. The sky was black and cracked, as if a giant hand had tried to shatter it like glass. The air carried whispers, thousands of voices murmuring at the edge of his hearing. The buildings around him were warped, bending at impossible angles. And then he saw himself, a dozen reflections, standing in the broken shards of a massive, floating mirror. Each one was him, but different. One wore a business suit, his expression cold and calculating, the version of him who had once chased money above all else. Another stood with blood-stained hands, his eyes hollow, the version of him who had failed to protect his family. A third was hunched over, wrapped in chains, whispering apologies into the void. His guilt made flesh. "You should not have come," the reflections spoke in unison. Their voices were distorted, overlapping, as if they had been torn from different timelines. "This is not your path anymore. You do not deserve to leave." Reyan clenched his fists. Was this the test? The letter had told him he would have to face his fears. And now they stood before him. The trial of the past. A door materialized behind the reflections, pulsing with golden light. His way out. But when he stepped forward, the guilt-ridden version of himself lunged, grabbing his wrist with icy fingers. "You abandoned them." Reyan struggled, his breath ragged. He had lived this guilt every day. The day his daughter had gone missing, the day his wife had walked away, leaving nothing but silence. "I tried," he whispered. The other him laughed, a broken, haunting sound. "Not hard enough." Chains erupted from the ground, snaking around Reyan's arms, legs, throat. They wanted to pull him down, back into the weight of his past. But suddenly, the whisper returned. "Reyan, you are more than your pain." A surge of warmth spread through his chest. He had a choice. For years he had clung to regret, but now, staring at his own shattered reflection, he realized the past could not be changed, but he could. He took a deep breath and let go. The chains snapped. The reflections screamed, their forms dissolving into smoke. The golden door swung open, and Reyan stepped through. The golden door behind him faded into darkness. Reyan was alone once more. No, not alone. A whisper slithered through the void. "Welcome back, Reyan." The air grew heavier, pressing down on him like an invisible force. Then a light flickered to life. He was no longer in the mirror world. He stood in a hospital room. Reyan's heart clenched. He knew this place. The beeping machines, the scent of antiseptic, the cold, sterile walls. It was his daughter's hospital room. And there on the bed lay Lena. His breath caught in his throat. She was so small, so fragile, her tiny chest rising and falling beneath a tangle of tubes and wires. Her eyes were open, but she did not see him. The door creaked. He turned. And there stood himself. A younger Reyan pacing back and forth, a phone clutched in his hands. "I need the money now," the younger version barked into the receiver. "This deal is everything. I don't have time for this right now." Reyan flinched. He remembered this moment. This was the night his business deal mattered more than his daughter. And then, for the first time, he heard Lena's thoughts. "Daddy, please stay. I'm scared." The words struck him like a blade to the chest. His younger self didn't hear her. He never did. Tears burned his eyes. How had he not known? The hospital room dissolved. A new scene unfolded. His wife Mira standing in the rain. You're never here, she whispered. I can't do this alone anymore, Reyan. His past self clenched his jaw. I'm doing this for us. For her. She doesn't need your success, Reyan. She needs you. And again. He heard the thoughts beneath her words. Please fight for us. Please don't let us go. But he never did. The memory shattered. Reyan fell to his knees, gasping for air. A shadowed figure emerged from the void, cloaked in shifting darkness. Its voice was neither harsh nor kind. Only through understanding can you be free. Reyan's hands trembled. His voice cracked. I didn't know. I thought. You thought their pain ended when they left. The words hit him with the weight of 1,000 regrets. But pain does not vanish, Reyan. It lingers. It echoes. The shadows loomed closer. The only way forward is through forgiveness. Not just of them, but of yourself. Reyan's throat tightened. He had hated himself for so long. Could he let go? Deep breath. A whispered prayer. And then, I forgive myself. The world exploded into light. The ground beneath him changed. Reyan found himself in a city of mirrors. Endless reflections surrounded him, stretching beyond sight. But they were not normal mirrors. Each one showed a different version of himself. One stood tall and powerful, wearing a sharp suit, a billionaire with no love, no family. Another wore a golden crown, but his eyes were hollow. His kingdom built on suffering. A third sat on the ground, covered in dirt and bruises, whispering to himself, broken and forgotten. The mirrors whispered. Which one is real, Reyan? A faceless entity emerged. Its presence vast and suffocating. Its voice was the wind, the void, the echo of every doubt. You must choose. Reyan stared at the reflections. He hesitated. Every path had led to a different fate. If he had worked harder, would he have been the billionaire? If he had fought for power, would he have been the king? There is only one truth, Reyan. The entity's voice was patient, waiting. Reyan's hands curled into fists. The only truth is the one I dare to create. He grabbed a stone from the ground and shattered the mirrors. Glass exploded in all directions, the reflections screaming as they vanished into dust. The entity faded, and once more light consumed the world. Trial 3. The Door of Truth. When the light faded, Reyan stood before a massive golden door. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, ancient, eternal, and locked. A mysterious old man appeared, dressed in robes. His eyes held the weight of time itself. You have come far, the old man said. But only one thing remains. Reyan's heart pounded. What do you truly seek? The words were simple, but the answer was not. For years he had chased success. Then he had chased redemption. Now he stood at the edge of something greater than both. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, I seek myself. The golden door unlocked. Beyond it there was no treasure, no throne, only a single reflection. His soul raw and unfiltered. It was glowing, pulsing with light, unbreakable, infinite. Tears streamed down Reyan's face. He was not lost. He was never lost. He had only forgotten. The whisper returned, softer now. You have remembered, Reyan. Now a step forward. And as he did, the light embraced him. Light surrounded Reyan, not blinding but endless. It filled him, seeped into his bones, wrapped around him like a warmth he had long forgotten. He was floating, weightless, formless, yet more real than ever. The golden glow before him shifted, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then, the whisper became a voice. Reyan. It was not distant now. Not a mystery hidden in the wind. It was himself. From the golden light a figure emerged. It was Reyan. But not the man he had known. This version stood taller, not in height but in presence. His eyes radiated an eternal knowing. His body pulsed with quiet power. He was not broken, not burdened, not lost. Who are you? Reyan whispered. The figure smiled. You. The part of you that never left. The part of you that always believed, always loved, always knew the truth. Reyan's breath caught. His higher self. Every ounce of pain, doubt, regret. It all rushed back to him in a wave. Then where have you been? His voice cracked. Why did I have to suffer alone? The higher self's expression did not falter. You were never alone, Reyan. I was always within you. But you had to remember. The space around them shifted. Suddenly, the timeline of his life unfolded before him. Each moment, every heartbreak, every mistake, every loss, appeared like glowing threads in a vast cosmic pattern. First it seemed chaotic, a storm of suffering. But then, as Reyan stepped back, he saw it. Divine pattern. Every fall had led to a rise. Every closed door had guided him elsewhere. Every heartbreak had shaped him. His worst days had prepared him for his greatest awakening. Tears welled in his eyes. This was never a punishment, was it? His higher self shook his head. Oh, it was a preparation. Reyan dropped to his knees. The truth was too vast, too overwhelming, too beautiful. He had hated his suffering. He had cursed his fate. He had begged for it to end. But now he understood. Every moment, even the ones that shattered me, they were always leading me here. The higher self nodded. Yes. Reyan wiped his face. Then what now? The space shifted again. And before him, two paths appeared. One led back to the real world. The other deeper into the light. He understood at once. Ois, stay here in enlightenment. Never return. Or go back. Live with purpose. The voice of his higher self softened. Decide, Reyan. But choose with truth. The moment Reyan made his choice, the world shifted. The golden light around him pulsed one last time, then collapsed inward, pulling him into a swirling tunnel of energy. It was neither painful nor violent, just a smooth, unbreakable current, drawing him toward the world he had once abandoned. And then, he woke up. Sharp inhale. His lungs filled with air, but it felt different. For the first time in years, every breath felt alive. He was lying on the cold stone floor of the abandoned monastery, the scent of damp earth and aged paper filling his senses. The flickering candlelight had returned, casting long shadows along the walls. But something was missing. The weight. The crushing, unbearable grief that had been his only companion for years. It was gone. Slowly, he sat up, placing a hand against his chest. His heart was steady, his mind clear. Then he heard it. The whispers. Not loud, not commanding. Just gentle murmurs flowing around him, through him. A quiet song woven into the fabric of reality itself. He needs to hear kindness today. She carries more pain than she shows. This moment matters more than you realize. Reyan's eyes widened. The world was speaking to him. Or had it always been speaking, and he had simply never listened? He pushed himself to his feet, his body lighter than it had ever felt. As he looked around, the monastery no longer seemed dead. The dust that covered the floor, the cracks in the walls, they weren't signs of ruin but stories. He ran his fingers along the old stone, and for the first time he understood. Nothing was truly broken. Everything was simply becoming. And so was he. Reyan stepped out of the monastery for the first time since his transformation. The air was crisp, the sky stretched endlessly above him, and the earth beneath his feet felt real. But it wasn't the world that had changed. It was him. He could hear it now, the silent stories within everything. The trees hummed with the patience of centuries. The wind carried whispers of laughter and sorrow, and the footsteps of strangers in the distance beat like a quiet rhythm of life itself. For years, he had walked among people but had never truly seen them. Now they were not just strangers. They were souls, each on their own journey. A man passing by carried a weight of regret in his shoulders. A young woman sitting alone near a cafe radiated quiet hope, waiting for something unnamed. And yet, they kept walking, unaware of the beauty woven into their existence. Reyan wanted to tell them, to shake them and say, "You are more than your pain. You are becoming." But he knew it wasn't something that could be taught. Had to be remembered. The next morning, Reyan picked up a pen for the first time in years. Not out of despair. Not to write a final prayer. But to write a beginning. He no longer needed to beg the universe for answers. He was part of the answer. And so he wrote. Not about suffering but about renewal. Not about endings, but about the infinite unfolding of life. His words poured onto the page, carrying not just his voice, but the whispers of the universe. And for the first time he felt whole. Days later, as he prepared to leave the monastery behind, he caught his reflection in a nearby stream. And there, over his heart, something glowed faintly beneath his skin. A symbol. The one that had called him here in the first place. Not etched in stone. Not hovering in the sky. But engraved into him. Reyan smiled. The journey was far from over. But for the first time he was ready. He had returned. And this time he would never be lost again. The sky burned with the golden hues of dusk as Reyan sat beneath an ancient oak. His journal resting on his lap. The years had softened him, but his presence had only grown stronger, like a fire that had once flickered in the dark but now burned with quiet, unwavering light. People often came to him, drawn by something unseen. Not because he was wise, nor because he had all the answers, but because he listened, because he understood. He had once walked the path of despair. He had once begged for the pain to end. And yet, here he was, alive, whole and at peace. Footsteps approached. Hesitant. Reyan glanced up and saw a young man standing before him, eyes filled with the same lost look Reyan had once carried. "I don't know why I'm here," the young man admitted, rubbing his hands together. "But heard something." A whisper. Reyan's breath caught. "It said my name," the stranger continued, voice unsteady. "And it told me. My journey isn't over." A knowing smile touched Reyan's lips. He closed his journal, placed it aside, and met the young man's gaze. "Then it's time you start listening." The cycle had begun again. And somewhere beyond the veil of time, the whisper smiled too.